This is Everyday Ethics, presented by the T.B. Maston Foundation, where we dive into the values that guide how we live every day. Here's your host, Dr. David Morgan.
Hi, I'm David, and welcome. Good to have you back with us on Everyday Ethics today. We're going to be talking about character formation, character development during this time that we're together. But before we get to that, I want to introduce you to something that we added after the last podcast. You may have seen that. And what we have is a companion piece called Continuing the Conversation that you can find the link to at the bottom of this recording. And we look forward for you checking it out for further information, further conversation, further helps in various ways. You'll find quotes, you'll find links. In fact, one of the links that we added last week was the link to Bill's Center for Congregational Ethics, where each day you will find daily reflections with an ethical bent to each one of those. And Bill, we thank you for giving us permission to do that.
Sure.
Something else you'll find on the Continuing the Conversations page is an action item. Last week, the action item was to name a friend, a colleague, a family member, someone that you're close to, but you have difficulty in conversing with them because you have significant differences of opinion. And I invited you in that action piece, if you were working with that, to just list 5 values out, call this person, and just talk about values. Not trying to convert either one, not trying to change either one's mind, but just sharing those things that you have in common. And that common good, that common ground is what we have everyday ethics, what we are working on. And a place I think that we can find that common ground is in character formation and character development. So Bill, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you being here again.
Yeah, glad to be here.
As we begin to talk about character, you and I have talked, Bill, for some time about the namesake for our foundation, T.B. Maston.
Right.
And I have been asked on several occasions to introduce him to groups, his writings, why our foundation is associated with him. And one of the things that I usually say is about Dr. Maston is really Dr. Maston is the embodiment of everything that he wrote and taught. He was an ethicist, quite significant for Southern Baptist and others as well. But that's where his primary focus was with Baptist. I've mentioned to you and others that I don't think his thought was not necessarily groundbreaking as some other ethicists, but when it came to applying that to everyday life, as exemplified by his own life, he was head above heels better than most of the rest of us. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I would agree with you. I knew Maston. I worked with him some. Right after I had joined the faculty where he had taught, he asked me to help him with a book, which was beyond my imagination. I'd heard about him for years and had gotten to know him, but to be asked to do some editing on his book and then to compose one of the chapters, and then the book published with my name on the cover too.
That's cool.
But, it really was. But I think just that example can relate a little bit of what he was like, and not just with me. And my relationship with him, I would have to say he was like a grandfather. I mean, we were separated by years in age. But even though some of his former students that I had known said, well, he was a pretty tough teacher, I could see that about him. but he was a kindly character. Um, some people might, because he spent so much time in retirement writing, that he was passive. Um, but his office door was always open. I mean, his line was, you come, just knock on the door, it's your time. And he would listen. Um, so that's a style in a lot of ways we have lost in our culture, uh, along with being able to carry on a conversation. I mean, your allusion that you just made, David, about an action plan. Um, I, I'm seeing that a lot of what's happening in our culture now, people don't know how to talk with each other. So it goes into uncivil kinds of things, and really nobody listening to some of the others. But with Maston, there was a genuine sense of humility about him. And back to the idea, he was not passive. Not only did he receive lots of, well, just awful letters and phone calls, threats against him, because he spoke up for African Americans, others, anybody in the culture that you could see were marginalized. But he wrote letters, and often to those people that would perceive themselves as being his adversaries, which is a kind of a startling idea, that you write to the adversaries. But he would start a chain of conversation that way, and find that maybe there wouldn't necessarily be strict agreement about everything, but people got to know one another as fellow human beings, which was one of his major points, that we respect everybody, we maintain a sense of human dignity about people. So that he remains a real example, and I'd have to say all too rare through the years of people I've known, of how he could speak quite strenuously over against those dynamics that would create disadvantage, so forth. But do it in ways that you have to say, you know, this must have been the way Jesus talked to a lot of people. So,
Well, it seems to me that where we are as a society, congregations today, uh, that we need to listen. You mentioned that. You mentioned civility, and we talked about that even a bit last week. A person contemporary that I hear addressing those issues seems to be David Brooks in his writings for the New York Times.
right.
He seems to have hit the pulse of some of the struggles that we're facing today as a society. And in articles this year in particular, it seems that he's really focusing on the character of individuals, but even more than that, calling for a communal character,
Right.
for a people that would hold us together, you know,
Right.
as one group.
Right.
One article that I read, he quoted someone about the three kinds of strengths that are needed for character formation, and I'll just read those. Strengths of the heart, which he referred to as being kind, considerate, and generous. Strengths of the mind, curious, open-minded, having good judgment. And strengths of the will, self-control, determination, and courage.
Oh.
And as I was continuing to read, it's what struck me in one of his articles was, as he was talking about character development, he used the term exemplar and how important it is for us to have exemplars that model good character.
Right.
Now,
Right.
we're going to run a risk here, I think, you and me, at this point, because you have, in one of your books, you talk about heroes and heroines
Right.
and how they mold and shape us.
Right.
And I don't want either one of us to move into hero worship today, but as you know, character is something that is enduring. It's been around for thousands of years, even predating
Yeah.
Jesus, as Brooks points out.
Right.
And in that book, you've identified some characteristics, dynamics is what you call them, that
Okay.
help us to explore character and shaping of character and virtues and values. Would you like to share with us about those?
Okay, so the dynamics important toward shaping character.
That works, yeah.
That's what you're, um, well, these that I could use and, you know, back when I was doing classroom work and still things that I work on, right? But back to the days, I was a high school biology chemistry teacher way years ago. And one of those bits that's still around is what then was called the scientific method. And these basic steps can help identify elements about character. Now, one of the things that I've got to say is when you talk about values, facets of character, it's really easy to be lost in the abstractions. You can't pull out a cup full of a value, but these values shape our attitudes, which shape our actions. We can observe actions, behavior, and will give us something of an image of what are the values operating in the person. So we can describe those things. That's one of the dynamics. We can begin to, let me look at the list real quick so that I don't forget.
Okay.
Warned me that you were going to ask about this. This is sort of long, long ago on a galaxy far, far away. But we identified these things. Maybe it's the behavior.
Okay.
We try to describe them. And this is not only perception of others, but our own self-perception, which is pretty hard to do. And it's really difficult to find anybody that perhaps that you could sit down with and they would describe what they think your values are
Mhm.
and what they are not. But so identify, describe them. That means elaborate. Facets, the shapes, how it's coming out, which goes into some analysis. So what about this in more depth? And then trying to interpret that in light of life. Do you have any sense of how it has come to be an important value to you? And finally, how is that value seen? How is it applied? Now back to Brooks' idea of exemplar. There's Maston that I just described how I knew him. In the book, which you made reference, that chapter about heroes and heroines, that's what I try to do with personal anecdotes, particularly referencing a grandfather of mine who exhibited some values of behavior, pretty strongly. Made impression on me, that in some ways, um, I am still saying some things in the same tone he did, with tone being more of the sound, but the substance of it. So his perspective on life. And like you said, there's a risk in there of this tipping over into an iconic sort of hero heroine worship. But I've been careful, I think, with reference to Maston. I mean, I knew him, another human being. I'm not going to elaborate on anything like flaws, none of that. But I think he would say as well, and one of his oft-used phrases was, I hesitate to say. So he could offer a critique, but it was never pejorative. Which means we can critique people without building them up that they have no faults. We don't have to go in that direction, but we can gather what we see in their behavior of what the values driving them must be. So.
Now, you had mentioned to me earlier in some conversations that your grandfather was from Tennessee, southeastern part, if I remember right.
Yeah, South Central.
Okay. And
county that was it bordered with Alabama.
Okay.
And I think it was well, the town was Winchester, but in the town square is a historical marker that county seceded from the Union with Alabama, that part of Tennessee.
Okay.
So, and not far from there is Pulaski, Tennessee, where allegedly the KKK originated.
Mm.
So that was the culture that particular grandfather grew up in.
Mm.
He was born in 1897, same year as Maston.
Well, and you had mentioned that you saw some similarities.
Yeah.
Because of the Tennessee, both being from Tennessee.
Yeah. Now the central part of Tennessee, well, the Tennesseans would tell you it's like it's three states: East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, and they have different political allegiances. You can probably detect different denominational preferences. East Tennessee reflected, and especially in Maston's time, but post-Civil War and pre-Civil War, in fact, more abolitionist perspectives on slavery, as did adjoining parts of North Carolina. And that was some of what fed into Maston. I think we mentioned in another episode, perhaps, most of Maston's life, early life, he grew up the son of a sharecropper. My grandfather, as I got to know him, he was a farmer rancher, people of the earth. And that's the way they related. It was on a more popular level. Now, my grandfather had only about a fourth grade education. But I have watched him doing business in the town outside of which we live. His farm, ranch products, the cattle. He was a good businessman. He knew how to work with numbers. so, there are different kinds of intelligence, but they did seem to have, and it took me a while after first meeting Maston. And by that time, my grandfather was deceased. But coming across this fellow that, my gosh, he reminds me of my grandfather's son. And I think some of that was out of their common geographic background. I sometimes say that grandfather was one of my first Bible teachers. We would, in the summertime, I would work for him, do field work. And we'd come in for lunch, and then after lunch, sit for a little while, and he'd pull out this really roughly well-used Bible and turn over to some passage at that time was just completely unknown to me. And he said, I've been reading this lately, and I'm wondering about this, that, you go into values conversation. He said, what do you think? Well, I'd never looked at it before. He said, well, take it home, work on it, see what you come up with. And I do that and come back maybe the next day. I said, I looked at that, and here's what I think it means. He said, well, I think it means that too. I've got another one over here I want you to look at. There it went. And now, working with Maston, he was a biblical ethicist. He majored on scripture and its meaning from that. Mm-hmm. His approach, lying in his background were all of these things of the educational pathways he'd gone down, but he still communicated the Bible in a lot of ways that my grandfather had. And we would talk about these verses and these readings, and it was just kind of fascinating. Here guys that basically same generation that, and they never met, but there were similarities to them, particularly around character, family life, how you make your money, how you spend your money. The basic points about life.
Well, I find it interesting. You're telling your stories, and as you did, I was thinking about working for friends of my grandparents on their farms.
Okay.
And that place, there was just something of being, I think, rural and farmer that does something, maybe just makes you a reflective person. Because I remember a comment was made one day when we were out fixing a tractor, which I had broken. The very patient man was working with me, and he said, David, we got to fertilize this land. We got to take care of this land.
Right.
Because it's going to have to take care of folks for a long time.
There you go.
And I'm thinking, farm and land, and there was just something different about that rural thing, which then made me think. Yeah. And we're going to be talking about this next season. But you have a book out, Integrity Wheel, also.
Right.
It talks about heroes and heroines and the importance of place.
Right. Yeah.
And various other of those influences that shape and form us into who we are.
Right. Yeah.
Any comments about that, or we just wait till next season?
Well, a hint about that, since you brought it up, this may solidify whether we use the book or not.
Okay.
This whole idea, David, about identifying values, So much of it does depend on what's the culture you come up in. Who are these people you come up with who are in and out of your lives? And there's the hero heroine chapter conversation. Is there anyone in there in your background? And it may be family, or it may be some biography you read, or some personality that you get to meet, and there is imparted from them a sense, a perspective, a perception about life. And the idea of the book is that these influences, they are varied, but all of us have these. Now, when I did it, the book, I had more in mind of, okay, can we recognize the high points that have influenced us? And I think that's a plus. In retrospect, I might include in the book now recognition of a certain naivete on my part that everything that gets transmitted to us, it's in a real mix, so that there may be things that get through to us in family life that bear negative prejudices that at the time and possibly never do we recognize the negative potential there. Now, back to Maston and my grandfather, both of them came out of Tennessee, which was one of the first states that fell to the Union in the Civil War. And the rest of the South, the old Confederacy, in the minds of a lot of people, that war is still going on. That for the really dyed in the wool types, it was the war of northern aggression. Never the fault of these people, but one of the things that got Maston into difficulty was his maintenance that slavery was inappropriate. It spoke against the dignity of every human being, but that was over against the culture in which he came up. That was still, by and large, and now, the cultural dynamics of power run along the lines of racism. Still the antebellum rhetoric. Still it goes all the way back to Columbus and just after the doctrine of discovery, that wherever the Spanish explorers went and could plant a flag for Spain, and there was no church there, they would declare it to be the property of Spain. And so this imperialism, this colonialism has gone on for years, centuries. And it's to be contested because it does go against human dignity. These influences get transmitted through the culture, values, if you please. How do you define values? Because there will be both positive and negative dynamics. Paul in the New Testament contrasted virtues and vices. That might clarify the discussion some, but it's highly possible we can be informed more by vices than virtues. And until someone is able to point it out to us, we may just miss all of that.
Hmm.
But there is some of the essence of Christian ethics. For Maston, his reference point always was, how did Jesus live? In fact, one of his best books was called To Walk as He Walked,
Right.
and borrowed from a verse in First John. And it speaks in a lot of ways of the humanism of Jesus. As long as you can keep him deity, there's not a lot of application there. But when you begin to see where Jesus walked, the people he came into contact with, that brings it down to each one of us. So there is the exemplar, the primary exemplar, not only for Maston, but for those who profess to be Christian.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Values, character, important, crucial. We differ on many of those,
Yeah.
partially because of where we're from,
Yeah.
partially because the way we look at the world, different perspectives, religion, non-religion, and the like. And then I think we're going to be exploring that a little bit more next week as we talk about various kinds of worldviews and how we just simply, some of the basic assumptions that we have that grow out of scripture or non-scripture. And so we'll spend some time with that on our next episode. I think one of the things I thought was very important that you mentioned very early, and I think it's one of the goals that we have in chatting, is the importance of listening to each other and trying to understand each other. And we will provide some information for our listeners on the Continuing the Conversation page, encouraging them and inviting them to listen to others and perhaps crystallize, perhaps clarify their own values, how important they are, why they're significant, and we'll pick up this conversation at a later time. So thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we will see you later, Bill.
Always good to catch up.
Good. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyday Ethics is brought to you by the T.B. Maston Foundation, which seeks to proclaim the abiding relevance of the whole gospel of Jesus Christ and provide support for the study and application of Christian ethics. For more information or to donate, visit tbmaston.org.